The world is filled with all kinds of lunatics and sick minds who thrive on harming others just for the sake of their own twisted pleasure. And if there's something history has taught us, is that evil is real. Today, we're looking at the scariest crimes that have left an indelible mark on history. From unsolved mysteries to shocking serial killers, we're about to discover some of the most spine-tingling tales that have haunted the world. Make sure you've got your nightlights on and your doors locked, because things are about to get seriously spooky. The case of the Roanoke Colony. The Roanoke Colony was one of the first attempts at colonization in the Americas. It was led by Sir Walter Raleigh in 1587 and faced quite a lot of challenges during the time the colony stayed on the continent. Some years later, the governor of the colony, John White, returned to England for supplies. But he was unable to come back in time due to the Anglo-Spanish War. When he finally returned in 1590, the entire colony had disappeared without a trace. And the only clue left in the English settlement was the word Croatan carved into a post. For years, many historians have tried to explain the mystery behind this disappearance, but no one has been able to provide a definitive conclusion. Some say the settlers relocated to the nearby Croatan island, while others affirm that they were killed by Native Americans or hostile Spaniards. In total, over 100 people disappeared, and their bodies were never found. Elisa Lam. The story of Elisa Lam is perhaps one of the most popular among YouTube consumers. Lam was a Canadian student who flew to Los Angeles to do some tourism. She chose to stay at the somewhat controversial Cecil Hotel without realizing that would eventually become her resting place. The Cecil Hotel is known for having housed not one, but two serial killers, Richard Ramirez, or otherwise known as the Night Stalker, and Jack Unterweger, an international serial killer who would even use the facilities to kill some of his victims. In addition, the Cecil Hotel has been the resting place for about 80 people who decided to put an end to their lives. Elisa Lam visited the hotel in 2013 and initially chose to stay in a shared dorm, but was moved to a private room 2 days later after her roommates complained about what they would describe as odd behavior. Then all of a sudden, the 22-year-old student vanished without leaving a trace. Lam was reported missing, and police attended the hotel to conduct an investigation. There, they reviewed the security cameras and found some disturbing footage. Lam was last spotted in the elevator of the hotel. She seemed distressed and scared. It was as if she was running away from someone. However, none of the other security cameras picked up on anyone following her. The odd thing is, the elevator doors never closed. Lam ran away, and the cameras couldn't pick her up anymore. Her naked body was found 19 days after her disappearance in a water tank on the hotel rooftop. After some guests complained about the water pressure, police could never find a culprit, so they closed the case and ruled it as an accidental death. Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer's story is yet another one that will make you have chills go down your spine. Driven by his need to never be alone, Dahmer, a gay man from Milwaukee, attempted to create zombie sex slaves by drilling the skulls of his victims and injecting acids inside of them, with the purpose of keeping them alive but unaware of what they were doing, so that they would do his bidding. Unfortunately for him, his experiments did not work, and his victims would succumb to their deaths. But Dahmer knew better than to give up. He continued his work and ended up murdering 19 African-American men between 1978 and 1991 before he was caught by the police when one of his soon-to-be victims escaped from Dahmer's apartment and requested help from the authorities. Dahmer confessed to his crimes and gave details about things such as eating his victims' organs and having sex with their corpses. The serial killer was nicknamed the Milwaukee Cannibal, and soon after he was captured, the judge sentenced him to 15 consecutive lifetimes in prison. However, he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate in 1994, and people forgot about his existence. Ronald DeFeo. Ronald DeFeo was a mass murderer who made the headlines due to the oddity of his case and the gruesomeness of his crimes. DeFeo was an American man who had moved with his family to a house located in Amityville, New York, where they lived a quiet life for some years without any incident. But the night of November 13th, 1974, marked a change in DeFeo's life. He murdered his entire family and felt no remorse after doing so. Police arrived at the crime scene and found DeFeo's father and mother, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters shot and dead. They took DeFeo away for his own protection, as he had claimed a member of the mafia had committed the crime. But it wasn't long until he broke and confessed to having been the author of the crime. Police could never determine the reason behind the killings, but DeFeo offered multiple versions. One of them was that he heard voices ordering him to kill them all. Of course, this statement led producers in Hollywood to take the story to the big screen and produce tons of movies about the case. DeFeo was sent to prison for life and died there at the age of 69. The Bitsevsky Park Maniac. The chessboard killer, or simply the Maniac as many knew him, was a Russian man named Alexander Pichushkin. Active in Moscow from 1992 to 2006, Pichushkin was convicted of brutally murdering at least 48 people, making him one of the most notorious serial killers in Russian history. The nickname Chessboard Killer derives from Pichushkin's claim that he aimed to murder a victim for each of the 64 squares on a chessboard, marking each kill on his own personal death chessboard. He would lure victims into the woods, and they would never be seen again. The Maniac was caught in 2006. He was sentenced to serve life in prison in 2007 and remains there to this day. Colleen Stan. This time, we move away from the murders and jump into something equally scary: slavery. Colleen Stan is an American woman who was kidnapped and kept as a sex slave for 7 years, from 1977 to 1984. Stan was trying to get to a birthday party and decided to hitchhike. Unfortunately for her, she got into the wrong car. In an interview with the victim, she claimed to have trusted the man in the car because he was there with his wife and their baby. What she didn't know was that this couple was not friendly at all. They would drive her to a secluded place and threaten her with a knife before tying her hands and kidnapping her to do their bidding. The criminals were Cameron and Janice Hooker, an unusual couple with some twisted fantasies. Apparently, Janice wanted a girl to become her husband's sex slave. There was only one rule: Cameron wasn't allowed to penetrate Colleen. He would instead have vaginal sex with her, inserting different instruments instead of his penis. This would change many years later when Cameron broke the rule and started to rape Colleen. Janice couldn't take it and accused him with the police. They were both arrested and were sentenced to life in prison. H. Holmes. Henry Howard Holmes was an American serial killer who confessed to having killed 27 people and attempted to murder another 50. And while this number does sound like a lot, people estimate he actually murdered more than 300 victims. But what makes Holmes any different from any other serial killer? Well, he was the owner of a murder house. Holmes grew up with a hatred towards rich and powerful women. He would usually con them, steal their money, and kill them. Holmes conned different companies to build a house with particular characteristics that he would then use to kill his victims. The castle, as he would call it, was designed only for women to enter. No kid or man was allowed inside. There were stairs leading nowhere, a basement full of torture devices, windows from where he could see his victims die, and areas where he could gas women and see them die. Over time, the castle stopped getting visitors, and he flew away only to be caught for another crime. Authorities launched an investigation and discovered he was actually a serial killer. Police estimated over 200 women had died inside the castle and sentenced him to die by hanging on May 7, 1896. Roger's disappearance. Joan Rogers was a devoted mother of two who had decided to go on vacations with their two daughters to Tampa, Florida. Joan's husband, Hal, had decided to stay behind and let the trio of women enjoy their time together. But it wasn't until a day after he could not get in touch with them that Hal called the police to try to locate his family. The police rushed to launch an investigation and drove to the hotel where Roger and her daughters were staying. They discovered their stuff was still there, but they hadn't used the room in some time. It wasn't long until authorities found Joan's car and inside a note that would solve the case. It turns out Joan had gone out to explore the town with her daughters and couldn't remember how to get back to her hotel. A man named Oba Chandler had approached Joan's car, offering to help her with directions, and then invited her and her two daughters to accompany him for a ride on his boat. She made the fatal decision to accept the proposal, as she didn't know Chandler was a serial killer who had planned to abuse them and then dump them into the water, where they remained for over a week before police found their body. Chandler was eventually caught and was convicted to be executed in prison for the murder of the Rogers family. Jamie Kloss. Jamie Kloss is a teenage girl who was kidnapped in 2018 when she was 13. The criminal, Jake Patterson, attempted to carry out his crime on October 5th for the first time. However, he desisted from moving forward because he spotted activity at Kloss's house. He once tried again to conduct the abduction 2 days later, but the story remained the same. It was but a week later when he got tired of waiting and broke into Jamie's house, where he shot and killed both of Jamie's parents. The teenage girl remained captive for 88 days before managing to escape and alert the police about Patterson. He was caught and sentenced to life in prison without chance of parole. When asked about the motive for his crime, he said there was no particular reason other than just seeing Jamie one day get on the school bus and knowing she was the girl to take. Rachel Barber. Rachel Barber was a 15-year-old dancer who went missing on March 1st, 1999. Rachel wanted to buy a pair of blue shoes she had seen in a store, but neither she nor her parents could afford to buy them. In order to get them, Rachel took a confidential job with someone she knew from her childhood that would give her enough money to buy the shoes she wanted. That someone was Caroline Reed, Rachel's former babysitter. Reed hated herself and wanted to basically become Rachel. She was obsessed with how pretty she was and planned to take her to her apartment with a false promise of easy work. But this was all a lie to lure Rachel to her place, where she strangled her and ended her life. The plan was to get surgery so she would resemble Rachel the most she could. But that wouldn't be accomplished, as police discovered the crime and arrested Reed, convicting her to spend 20 years in prison. And that's all for today. Which of these stories frightened you the most? Do you know of any other stories that should have been on the list? Let us know in the comments below.